I am currently an ORISE fellow at the EPA, kind of an interesting position, sort of a pipeline position to move into the EPA. So I'm a postdoctoral fellow. My Ph.D. is in urban planning. And so I'm excited to be working on social science issues for the Office of Research and Development with the EPA. So I think I'll leave it at that, except to say I have a very interdisciplinary background, you know, sort of starting in biology, microbiology, and moving into the policy realm sort of slowly over time. So I'm happy to talk about that transition with the group today.
Thank you. Dr. Hoover, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Fushcia-Ann Hoover, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, as well as the founder and CEO of educational consulting business called Eco Green Queen. And a little bit about my work. So the three foci of my work include urban planning, environmental justice, and green infrastructure performance. And so a lot of the questions I ask are really trying to understand both what are some of the more cultural services and benefits of green infrastructure, and what are the ways that we can measure and evaluate that, as well as thinking about implications of green infrastructure practices as it pertains to either perpetuating or remediating environmental injustices in communities of color across cities in the United States.
Thank you. And Dr. DeWolf, go ahead.
Oh, I'm actually not a doctor, but thank you for, So I currently work for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation as the Director of Sustainable Mobility in the Secretary's Office. My background is in child development, and when I was studying genetics and public policy and education and different things that kind of shape human behavior, I was introduced to the concept of the built environment, and having had the fortune to spend time in different places around the world, was reflecting on why people, how the built environment, you know, impacts us, and this notion that, you know, we shape the built environment and thereafter it shapes us. And so I was thinking a lot about public space, and someone said to me, you know, the majority of our public space is our streets, and, you know, they don't have to look the way they are. We see them that way. I mean, it's asphalt and concrete. But you know, after a very kind of interdisciplinary, broad background, fast forward, I've spent now 14 years in the transportation field, and then the last 5 years in this appointed position, working for the Secretary, working on how to develop a sustainable mobility portfolio within a multi-thousand person transportation agency that historically, you know, focused on the automobile and highways and pavement, and now how do we shift that to kind of people-centered, human-centered, and yeah, that's what I work on.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'd like to start off on a positive note, and I'd love to hear one recent success story that's happened in your particular field, just some advance that's been made that really does inspire you to keep doing this work to make more robust infrastructures.
I'm happy to start. So two things. I mean, one is when COVID shut everything down in March, travel behavior and the way people use our streets changed overnight, and then the need for how we use our public space both changed, and then also kind of issues, longstanding issues, you know, were thrust into a kind of the forefront, and then we also saw troubling trends around increase in fatalities due to speeding and other behavior and issues. We also saw the need for more outdoor space you know, from just COVID protocols and also things being closed and people wanting to get outside. And so at Mass DOT, you know, we had, and, you know, with the administration, you know, always thinking about kind of how do we do things quicker. Historically, transportation, it's like you want to change something in your street, it's going to take decades and it's going to take a lot of money. And we took inspiration from other places around the world, and our administration launched a program called Shared Streets and Spaces. And they originally allocated $5 million where we could give out grants to municipalities. Massachusetts is made up of 351 cities and towns, and to give out money for municipalities to repurpose street space in support of walking, biking, public transit, outdoor commerce, dining, you know, public health, safety. And it was so popular that it then turned into a program, a one-year program that for $33 million, we gave out, we supported over 300 projects in over 180 communities. And it was a game changer because all the projects had to be delivered within a 30, 60, 90, you know, time frame. And so we just saw this incredible change like overnight on our streets, and it's fueling a lot of our inspiration and energy moving forward.
I can hop in. Yeah. So one of the things, so I've recently moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've been learning about the city and planning practices. And the city is undergoing a new 2040 comprehensive plan, and a lot of that includes different measures for green infrastructure, sustainability, transportation, etc. But I think so maybe to preface, part of my work in environmental justice is it's also really rooting in activism and the power of organizing and really ground up movements. And there's an organization here called the Housing Justice Coalition that has been a really strong force and advocate for you know, thinking about walkability or some of these different amenities and integration of infrastructure with community health and well-being, and specifically really trying to address things like affordable housing or really the lack thereof, and gentrification or displacement. And so in terms of kind of the biggest success story that I've seen is that the 2040 plan, which was just approved this summer by City Council, has a lot of justice-oriented language and language acknowledging and recognizing the need for equity as part of these efforts, which has largely been because of the work that the Housing Justice Coalition has done over the past several years. And so I think, you know, that's a great thing on multiple levels, because I think also once we have language in something like a comprehensive plan, that also allows us to really advocate and push for specific ways of using green infrastructure or other types of infrastructure implementation practices in a way that if that language were absent, then it would be much harder to kind of hold the city accountable. And so I think that's been very exciting to be able to move here and get to know the coalition and see the efforts that they are doing in real time that are really community based.
It's really great to hear about the projects that you're both working on. And I love this, starting in this more positive space. This is really nice. So as I mentioned, you know, I'm a fellow with the EPA, and I've just been in this position for less than a year. So it's all kind of new, and I'm learning. But one of the exciting things has been the focus on environmental justice, which is very central to my work as a social scientist. And just a lot of the excitement that I feel in the agency around that focus, and people feeling like they're able to pursue that. You know, I'm also kind of getting used to the politics of it all too. So I know that it's coming from different places, but it's exciting to be in an agency that's energized right now around something that I think is so important. So, you know, in every meeting I'm in, you know, chemists, engineers, they're talking about environmental justice, they're talking about social science and how we can come together around these things. And I know it's a really slow process, but it's exciting to hear about, you know, Jackie, as you're saying, at the state level and Fushcia locally, you know, we're working on tools that might help communities do some of this planning and really embed that justice language in there. And so it's exciting to start working with communities to see how we can help provide scaffolding for others to learn, for example, maybe from what you're talking about, Fushcia, the success there, or the success you had with COVID, Jackie. So that's, yeah, really, really good to be on this panel with you both.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear y'all talking about communities. And Dr. Hoover, you did explicitly mention leveraging these organizing skills in order to make change and advocate for justice. Coming from academia, I can feel very removed from the community at times. So I just want to hear your thoughts about how to be very intentional about engaging with the communities affected by your work and really respecting their culture and needs.
Yeah, and of course, you know, Dr. Matsler and Jackie, y'all would like to address this question, please do. I think from my perspective, a big part of it starts with recognizing that all I am doing is coming in with a set of skills that I hope are useful. So, you know, most of the time, that is me going in and attending meetings and, you know, participating in doing some of the work, whether that be reading through sections of part of a portion of the plan, or serving as a facilitator for like a town hall. You know, some of it is just simply, you know, embedding oneself as a community member and someone that is equally invested in the successes of the organization or the residents that you're in partnership with. And I think, you know, for me, part of it is also easy to do, and that, you know, I am a Black woman, and so identifying and wanting to aid predominantly Black communities is both a part of, you know, who I am as well as my work, and that is partly one reason why it is so central to my work. And so I think, you know, when you're not necessarily a part of the community or group of residents, right? The biggest thing is to be compassionate and have empathy, but also really be invested and recognize that their success is your success, right? And so I'm coming in more so with resources and methodologies and ways to try and add robustness to the work that is already going on. And so I think that's what I try to use as my guide when I am thinking about communities to work with and how that connects to my own research.
Building off of that, I mean, I think about this question. There's so much. I'm sure we could talk for for a long time on this topic. I'll start with kind of an example. So in government, public process has been grounded in like hosting a public meeting at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, you know, in a building, and you know, who does that work for? And one thing that we've been trying to do through planning processes and through projects is, you know, there's using different tools. And so when we did a statewide bicycle plan, a statewide pedestrian plan, we didn't host any public meetings at 6 p.m. in a gym. We ended up doing focus groups, surveys. We attended other people's events to get input. We created like kits for organizations to collect input, and trying to kind of just more intentionally diversify the type of input we could get. But there's so much work to do in this arena and so much more to learn and improve on. But it's been exciting to be part of, some of that change. And the other thing is, in state government, one of the things, when I just drawing it back to the program I was talking about before, Shared Streets and Spaces, the really cool thing about that program was we were just providing funding, but it was communities then proposing what they wanted to do. So it wasn't us saying, okay, this is what you have to do on this street or in this neighborhood. It was communities saying, we have this proposal, and we were able to give funding, but then we were also able to partner with a foundation that was able to provide free technical assistance to communities. So that was more communities were able to access the state funding because they could tap into free resources to help them put together an application, get technical support, get grant support, when a lot of communities just don't even, baseline, just don't even have a person who could even apply for a grant. And so just continuing in different ways, breaking down obstacles and boundaries for more people to engage in processes.
I'll just add my support for what you both have said here. I think that just reiterating that time and familiarity in a community is so important. I did my dissertation work was bi-coastal, so I was in Oregon and also in Maryland, and I was back and forth and feeling out of touch with both at some times. And so I think I really, following on what you said, Fushcia, about that time and familiarity and being there in the community, I'm participating and helping their success. Even if it's not directly related to your project is just so valuable and so important, and part of that give and take with the community. And I think I would just add as well, as a student, I struggled with trying to communicate what I offered to the groups that I was working with. And I think that's something that again, my positionality, a white woman from Oregon in Baltimore, and the communities that I'm interacting with, it was really important for me to hone in on what I was actually offering folks. And I think that is something that my confidence grew through time, and to be able to say, these are things that I have to offer, this is my skill set, and what I'm not offering, and being okay with people saying okay, well then we're not interested. And I'm like, okay, that's great, moving on. So yeah, so I think in the community space, it's really variable. There's a lot going on, but I think really just that time and familiarity is huge. So yeah.
That's really great input from all of you. I next, I'd like to discuss what are those metrics for success in a community. I heard that from a couple of you thinking about the project succeeding. What are those metrics? Are they quantifiable? Are they not quantifiable? And just how do you measure success is productively? And I'd love for y'all to elaborate on that more eloquently than I can.
Jump back in. No one wants to go first. Jackie, you want to go first?
Happy to. I think, so, I mean, this is one where kind of the intersection of research and policy is really needed and is really important. Again, kind of speaking from the work that I'm doing currently, the measures of success historically came with a certain set of kind of like inputs, and what we need to do is kind of change. We're evolving kind of what that measure of success, you know, is, and what does it mean to be successful. And just to give another example, we did this huge effort to kind of collate all potential like performance measures from across the country. You know, from cities to counties to states, and we collected, I don't remember the exact number, it might have been like 121 or something, like perspective, like performance measures that we could adopt, because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we knew that there was a lot of research and there was, you know, best practices and things communities were already doing. But then we went through our own exercise to kind of say, okay, what can we measure like at a state level? But then it's also like, what data is available? So you can come up with all these great ways you want to measure success, but if there's no mechanism to actually collect the information, and then at a state level collect it at scale, you know, to apply. And so this is a huge growing need, and we've only just kind of scratched the surface. And again, from the work that I do, you know, we had an incredible amount of data around vehicles, and we had no data around who walks, where they walk, where people want to walk, how they walk, you know, how many. And so again, we were making all these decisions about our streets and our public space with the one input, you know, vehicles. And now we are, you know, MassDOT has just launched this huge effort, procuring big data, putting out counters, doing qualitative surveys to try to, you know, have more input to be able to develop measures. And then building kind of what we have been calling like equity checks, making sure that we don't silo equity. And so it's not how are we doing here, how are we doing here, how are we doing here, how are we doing with equity? It's like making sure that there's an equity check to like every single performance measure, and it's embedded, you know, in all that we do. But anyway, I'm curious to hear from everyone else, and so many needs in this arena. I'll just add one more thing quickly. One of the things that got me into this work was child development, and there's a lot of really cool work that talks about this measure of 8 to 80, that if cities and streets like work for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, it like works for everyone. And so just breaking it down really simplistically, a lens I bring a lot to my work is just, you know, does this work for an 8-year-old? You know, like, would you feel comfortable letting an 8-year-old walk across the street here, or, you know, play here? And, you know, that's a measure of success in terms of health and safety and livability and equity.
And I think that's it really reflects also the work and the things that I've been finding in some of my recent projects. And so one of those things is looking at the planning language in plans from across 19 different cities in the United States, and comparing the rationale that they cite for using green infrastructure and implementing GI across their landscapes versus the actual siting criteria. And, you know, in some ways, predictably, a lot of the rationale focuses on cultural services and, you know, well-being and walkability and creating these more holistic communities. But when it gets to the actual siting criteria, so much of it comes down to things like feasibility and space availability or cost, or just stormwater needs. And so I think, you know, it is this combination of a lack of data or a lack of perhaps finance and people power to be able to actually go out and figure out what measurements do we need to take if we are prioritizing well-being. What does that mean to create social cohesion? How do you measure that? And so I think, you know, in terms of figuring out how you measure success, a lot of it is that. I think it also depends on your motivation. One thing that Charlotte is doing in terms of public transportation is putting in light rail. However, they don't present light rail as a mode of getting people from A to B. It is a tool for economic development. And so in that sense, if you are defining transportation as an economic development tool, any displacement or gentrification that occurs as a result of that, right, is not unsuccessful, because if it's building up businesses, then that is the measure of success. And so I do think we have to be really conscious about what it is that we're actually interested in attaining with these practices, and whether those measurements exist or that data exists to be able to confirm whether it's successful or not.
I just want to jump on that. I know we're trying to get to more questions too, but it's exciting to hear what you both are saying here. I think that Jackie, to your comment about the 8 to 80 design, I love that, because I think that's something that we're really focusing on in some of the tools that I'm working on with the social science team here, is that idea of centering vulnerable communities in the planning process. And as you're saying, Fushcia, like, what's the language there? Like, if we can, respect and support those communities, it's going to work for everyone. Like, that's going to be benefit for everyone. And this idea that the language that's in there, sometimes that's framed as, there's pushback against, like, okay, well, this isn't fair, we need to be objective, or but a lot of the things that we have out there right now in planning for green infrastructure are implicitly, and for transportation, are implicitly helping certain groups, right? So what we're hoping to do is a lot talking very deliberate, we're being deliberate and explicit about where we're focusing those efforts, and really making sure that language follows, so that it really happens. So it's exciting, and I love that study of yours as well, Fushcia. It was very inspirational. We started looking at incentive programs for green infrastructure, and who is actually benefiting from incentive programs, or who are they actually aimed for, when you start to look at the application processes. And it's kind of burdensome. You have to know a lot of technical lingo. You have to know that the incentive exists. You have to, own property. It's basically helping the people who are already doing pretty well, as you might expect. But it's just nice to have that data out there, so we can try to change what we're doing.
Okay, and before we move to audience questions, I would like to hear from each of you briefly about one thing in your field that you are excited about, whether it's a problem you're excited to tackle, or I guess a solution that is right on the horizon. So Marissa, I don't think you've answered any of the questions first, so I'm going to single you out.
Ooh, good one. Good work, moderator. Yeah, thanks, Marie. I guess I'm just really excited because I'm new in the federal agency space. I'm kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, thinking about how social science can be more a part of what we do in the environment, in these really technical places. So it's really energizing for me to be working with a lot of really technical stuff, and thinking about how that's, I think Jackie, you were saying at the beginning, we don't have to think of the built environment as this, shaping and shaped by the social. And so it's thinking about things like really technical cleanup stuff is kind of what I'm into now, looking at disaster waste, a little bit of a shift from green infrastructure, but thinking how that is shaped by social interactions and social actors, and how we can focus some of our energies on that, rather than just coming up with, it's very important to come up with the technical specifications and learn more in that space, but in a vacuum, that's really problematic, I think. And so I'm excited that EPA is extending more and more, and having more social scientists join the fold, so to speak. So yeah, that's what's exciting for me right now.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, we could talk about the EPA. I also was a postdoc at the EPA, but under the prior administration. So the tone was very different when I was there. But I think in terms of, excitement, things keeping me going, certainly a lot of the research and interest in things like environmental justice and equity and the motivation to really bring that into not just not just silo it, right, but to actually integrate it is really encouraging to see. And I think I also really appreciate well, I'm calling it a quote. A colleague of mine, Dr. Guillermo Caballero, who is a political scientist, tweeted this the other day, and he said, "Remembering why is so crucial to keeping you going." And I think for me, I get excited because when I remember why I'm doing this work, why I'm asking the questions I am, why I'm here at this panel, right? Those are all things that help me return to the things that keep me motivated. And so I think, I encourage all of you listening to also think about your why and what it is that excites you about research in grad school and the things that you're pursuing both in and outside of the classroom.
So I'm gonna go off of that to just say, I love that, and the why aspect, and also like write it down or like put it next to your computer or put it somewhere and revisit it often, because it, you can get swamped, you can get so caught up in the day-to-day work, but kind of having that goalpost or having that lens. And so when I talk about the child development, it's fun for me in this setting to bring it up a lot, because, to bring it up and be reminded, because it's like probably most of the people I work with might not even like know that's my background, or people, assume things about why you do the things you do or what you bring to the table, but trying to kind of bring that into the work is inspiring. And I think now more than ever, seeing a lot more of that creativity and like diversity in all ways in the workplace. So like just in transportation, there's just so many different people coming from different fields, to this one thing. So it's not just you have to have a transportation degree or transportation engineering or transportation planning. It's like everyone has something to bring to the table, and there's so many different ways to engage on the issue, which is like what is really exciting. And has kept me, in the field all these years. And then just tying it back to kind of research and policy, I'm part of a national association that establishes kind of research roadmaps nationally. And one of the things is that, research ultimately is the groundwork for like why we design roadways the way we do. But some of that research is decades old, and, we're just starting to kind of write new research needs to kind of establish a whole new suite of research that factors in people in various modes and different perspectives that will now provide the basis for how we plan and design things, for decades to come. So I'm excited to see that shift and to see more research coming out that's really gonna kind of shape our future. So.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. With that, we are going to turn to audience questions. So first up, we have Zachariah, who would like to ask your ideas and opinions in terms of reducing car dependence in the US, which is significant in terms of climate in the form of air pollution, justice, poor people find it hard to move around, and aesthetics. Car-infested landscapes are ugly. And specifically, they would like to ask Jackie about Massachusetts' present and planned policies to reduce car dependence.
So, it really breaks down to we're going to reduce dependency on driving. We have to give people safe, comfortable, and convenient options. There's a quote from Jeanette Khan, formerly in New York City, who I often quote, saying, "We can't wish people onto foot or onto bike or onto public transit. We must create a network that makes people want to get on." And so what we have been working to do is how do we make options safe, comfortable, convenient, reliable, and the past 5 years have put incredible amount of investment and work and energy, and then building teams and operations teams to do the better best network and best priority work, and to do just incredible amount of work to make the options attractive for people, because people still need to move. It's just giving them alternatives that make it possible to do it in different ways.
So that's a really insightful view of how policymakers can keep working in order to make these attractive options. That segues well into Megan's question, who really wants to know what individuals can do. So Megan lives in LA and cycles to and from. They appreciate this as a cheaper and greener commuting option, but LA doesn't prioritize cyclists past painting the roads. How can individuals work to encourage enforcement of laws around cycling or other transportation issues when other modes of transportation, like cars, are the main focus of the city? As an example, I have on many occasions seen cops parking in bike lanes to get food. So in a world where the government doesn't seem to be creating these better options, how can we as individuals make that change and advocate for that change?
I just wanted to jump in on, these are great questions. And I wish there was a good, like a quick answer for this. I feel like that would be we'd be doing so much better. I think one thing that's really interesting for cars, like, so coming from, again, my background, like urban planning and thinking a lot about cultural aspects, is cars are so culturally embedded in the United States. And it's definitely embedded in the physicality of our cities, which is huge. And I think that's, rethinking that is a big one. But to move towards that, I think it comes back to that, the language that we were just talking about in how do we talk about cars and car accidents. Like, we even still say things like, it's a car accident. Like, we didn't mean to do that, even though we know people are going to smash into each other and die, right? Like, it's not really an accident. It's sort of that like natural disaster. Is it really a natural disaster? So I think, this is my perspective coming from this cultural place. I think a lot of it is going to be about one front is going to be sort of working on that culture. One part of that is going to be providing these, like, the safe physical space for these actions, which is huge, but also the safe, like, cultural space, and to be able to move on into a different place. I think a lot of that is going to be in the consumer place, in consumer, how we talk about cars, how we sell cars, how we sell that dream. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's exactly an answer, but kind of pushing, if you can think about how you can push on those levers, I think that's gonna be really helpful.
Yeah, rhetoric is a huge part of this. And I would just encourage people to get involved locally. Before I joined the state government, I ran a community nonprofit and was involved in the organization for 8 years, doing local organizing around these issues. And so I would encourage people to kind of get involved in local organizations, and where they don't exist, looking to find kind of allies to organize around these issues, because we often say, especially, transportation is local, that's really where, it's like what is happening on your street, where you live, work, and play. And there's a lot of great resources. I'll also put my contact information in the chat if people want to follow up, but yeah, there's not kind of one answer to that question, but there are some really wonderful organizations in LA doing that advocacy work.
I agree with everything that's been said. And I think it can seem overwhelming not knowing quite where to start, right? But if you are an avid cyclist and you're on your bike a lot, go start with your local bike shop. Where do you go take your bike in? You know, especially if it's a locally owned store, oftentimes they may know of an organization, or there may be some type of collective group across bike shops in the city or area where you can link in and be connected to those spaces. You know, even if there's like a meetup group, right? Are there groups of people that go cycling once a week, every other week? Part of it is finding people who are like-minded or interested in the same type of end goal, and figuring out, okay, how do we maximize the fact that we're all here, we're all using the system, and we all want to see changes. A lot of times it really just is who is the loudest, right? And developing those relationships with both organizations, businesses, and politicians, and you know, your local leadership can really be all the difference between something being proposed at the state or city level versus it going ignored.
Yeah, that's awesome. Organizing is really just talking to people and having relationships, and it can be hard work, but it's skills that folks already have. So thank you all so much for those wonderful recommendations, strategies, words of wisdom. Megan, I don't see any new questions in the Q&A, so I want to highlight this question that Dr. Hoover, you've answered in the Q&A and in the chat. So folks are wondering, they'd like you to talk more about the role that environmental justice has played in your work since arriving at UNC Charlotte.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, because I'm new right now, part of it is a lot of reading, a lot of, you know, walking around, seeing what's happening, trying to get a sense of the cultures of the city, both politically and socially. But part of the larger body of work that I linked to in the chat is also work that I'll be expanding, right? So bringing Charlotte into that because I'm here, and because they've approved this new 2040 plan, right? And so this is really an opportune moment to try and add in additional language that isn't just motivational, but actually can be measured or implemented in such a way that the successes are relevant to both the communities of color here as well as the city. And in particular, you know, Charlotte is both one of the fastest growing cities in the nation, but also one of the fastest growing Latinx populations in the nation as well. And so there's a lot of diverse communities here, and a lot of really interesting planning history in terms of the industry of the city. It's also a big finance hub. And so there's a lot of conflicting points of view and perspectives, I think, and a lot of different realities that people see in terms of how they want Charlotte to look in 10, 20 years. And so that deeply connects to environmental justice work, thinking about who are the communities that are going to get left behind, who are the communities that are currently left behind, right, historically and presently. And so really trying to figure out, you know, what is the greatest need, and what are the elements of my work and practice and skill set that can help try and make sure that those voices are elevated and do come throughout the planning process. So that's what I'm hoping to go with this work.
Great. And as Dr. Hoover said, those, sorry, new message. Those links are in the chat. I'm also seeing that Jackie has posted